Hey guys, Mrs. Horn here. Today we're going to take some notes from our evolution packet. We're going to start with chapter 22, and I'm going to walk you through the information that you'll need to fill in page 2. Today's lesson is on individuals who were very influential in the early thoughts of evolution. There are 4 people on page 2 that we're going to talk about, but I have a few extras that I think are important for us to know as well, and there's no space for them on the notes. So when I talk about those extra people, feel free to add them in at the top or in the margins on the side. So we're going to start off with James Hutton. James Hutton was a geologist that believed the landscape of the Earth was altered by slow and gradual changes. He also thought those changes were still happening today. Charles Lyell, also a geologist, came up with a theory. He called it the principle of uniformitarianism. He believed that mechanisms of change are constant over time. Geologic processes that happen today are the exact same processes that happened in the past. Things like movement of tectonic plates, volcanoes, wind, erosion by water. All those things happen today, and he believes that they've been happening forever. Then we have Jean Lamarck. He came up with 2 ideas, which have actually been disproven since he's come up with them. But at the time, in the early 1800s, everybody was on board with what he was saying. The first thing he came up with was the theory of use and disuse. And this is when he thinks organisms use parts of their body, and as they use them more and more, those parts of their body became stronger, became larger, because they were using them. He thought that if they didn't use certain parts of their body, then those parts would become smaller and eventually wouldn't exist at all. Lamarck also came up with the idea of an acquired trait. Now, an acquired trait is something that you take on during your lifetime. You didn't originally have it. And he said that any modification an organism picked up during their life would be passed on to their offspring. The big example he used were giraffes. He said that a giraffe, over years and years, continued to reach higher up into a tree, and as they would do that, they were elongating their neck, making that a stronger part of their body. But they weren't born with a long neck, so he says, and by lengthening their neck, when they had offspring were born with an already long neck. Now, since he came up with these ideas in early 1800s, we have actually collected a lot of evidence to prove them to be both incorrect. He believed that evolution occurred because organisms had a drive to be more complex. This is not true. Cuvier was a paleontologist. Now, he's not on your sheet, but important to know. He was a paleontologist who believed in what he called catastrophism. Catastrophism is when events in the past occurred very suddenly and never occurred again. So he believes the opposite of Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell, remember, was slow and gradual changes to the Earth over time, and Cuvier believes it was sudden, instant events that never repeated. Tom Mathis was another one who was influential in the world of evolution, and he wrote an essay. He wrote an essay on overpopulation, and he said that human suffering, things like disease, war, famine, all of human suffering is due to the human population growing faster than our resources. Alfred Wallace, not on your sheet, but Alfred Wallace he wrote an essay, or I'm sorry, he came up with a hypothesis about natural selection. He asked Darwin to read it, and after Darwin read it, it actually propelled Darwin to finally publish his book. And he called his book The Origin of Species. Now, Darwin had collected a lot of evidence on natural selection, but was very hesitant to publish it. It was actually Alfred Wallace who came up with the same idea of natural selection, but independently. They were not actually working together. Alfred Wallace sent Darwin his hypothesis and asked him to read it as a friend and as a favor. And Darwin read it, and the fact that another person came up with the same idea he had encouraged him to publish his work. And he actually published it before Alfred Wallace did, which gave Charles Darwin the instantaneous fame of becoming the father of evolution. Now, Darwin, who is on your note sheet, but there's not a lot of space to write things because the whole next part of the chapter is just on Darwin. But what you need to know now is that Charles Darwin was greatly influenced by the work of James Hutton, Charles Lyell, and Tom Mathis. He thought that if the Earth and the landscape of the Earth could change slowly and gradually over time, couldn't that also work with living organisms? So your page 2 of notes from your evolution packet should be chock full of information, and I hope that's helpful.